Hey y'all, welcome back. I love that we're in Texas and I can say that now. It just sounds so fun. So this is the Geode panel, and you may have seen various kinds of panel discussions in your life before. You've seen the panel where people argue with each other and talk over each other, but I know these folks and that's not really what they're about. I've also seen the panel where people talk slowly and ponderously about philosophical topics and discuss weighty things. And I just don't think they're going to do that today either. But instead, I would like you to think about that conversation you had at a coffee shop. It was super chill and laid back. Maybe you were sitting in front of a fireplace and you couldn't stop thinking about that new cool tech that you were learning about. And you were just rapid fire talking back and forth, enjoying your cappuccino and enjoying that technical conversation. So that's what we're going to do today. And like Dan said to start this day, there's some nostalgia here. We're back in Austin after 4 years kicking off the Geode project. Super cool to be back in Texas eating some good barbecue. And so that's the discussion we want to have. And one of the things I love about this time of year is getting to hear your stories. So that's the conversation. One thing I think you've already figured out is how to ask questions. So that's super awesome. I want you to know that your questions are welcome, and if someone else, if you have a question, someone else probably has that same question, so go ahead and ask it. Whether it's simple or complicated, we want to have an open forum for a conversation. So let's go ahead and get started with introductions. As Jag said, my name is Anthony Baker. I'm a member of the Apache Foundation and a Geode PMC member and committer. I've been working on the project for over 7 years now. And the thing that's crazy to me about that is that I work with people in the Geode community who have been doing it for 2 or 3 times longer than that, or even more. And that just kind of blows my mind away. Anyway, so that's who I am. Let's go through the panelists and introduce ourselves, and then we'll start doing open mic questions. So go for it.
I'm Jacob Barrett. You can call me Jake. I've been working on this project for about 5 years now. I'm a PMC member and committer. I've done both on the native client, was part of the process to get that open sourced and converted over to C++11. So I've got a lot of knowledge around the native client if you have questions there. And most recently, I've been working on the performance, working with the benchmarks and working with Huynh.
Hi, my name is Jimei Liao, and I've been with Geode project for about 4 years. And I remember my first task is to get Pulse into the open source repository. And at that time, that's like my second day or second week. So I had no idea, however I did it, but it worked. So if you look at the Pulse code, so if you have a problem with Pulse, I'm probably the one to blame. And then I worked on the GFish, mostly GFish management tool, and about the GFish parser, and then moved on to the integrated security. And now I'm working on the new and improved management V2 API. That's it.
I'm Jason Huynh. I've been working on Geode and the closest version for about 7 years now, or over 7 years now. I've touched various parts of the product, from querying to releasing querying, indexing. Oh, you can't hear us? Weird. Okay. I can hear myself. Let's start over. I'm Jason Huynh. I've been a part of the project for over 7 years. Worked in OQL, engine, indexing, WAN, pretty much all across the board. Every day I get to work with these fine people and people in the community. So,
Mic check. Oh. Hi, my name is Navarn Nag, Nava for short. I've been a committer and a PMC member since 2016, so the least experience among the panelists. Jason has been my mentor. I've been working in same as him in the queues, query engine, WAN replication, Lucene implementation.
Cool, thanks so much, folks. We have a bunch of topics we'd love to talk about, but I'd rather hear from you, and I know there's a bunch of questions out there because there's been hands going up all throughout the day. So if you have a question that hasn't been answered yet, please raise it super high. We've got some amazing runners. Thanks to Diane for doing that for us today.
Hi, is this on? Yeah. So when we started out with Jumpfire at Duke, we saw polls, and we tried to use polls for everyday management, right? But we quickly found out that it's more for just a quick look into the cluster and not so much management. So my question is, what is the future of polls, and will it become more of a management tool than it currently is?
Excellent question. So let me just repeat that. What I heard was you were using Pulse. Pulse is a web GUI that gives you some information about the Geode cluster, but it was insufficient in some ways, and you're wondering, like, what's next? How can I interact with the system better? So let me throw that to you, you all. What's the future of management, observability? How would you recommend users see what's going on inside their cluster?
I was actually surprised how many people are using Pulse. But that's what I heard from Gan saying, like, actually, there's quite a lot. But I don't know, the Pulse is the web tool, and currently we are talking about a new UI, but that's still in the plan. And GFish is another configuration tool. That is a CLI based, and it's not a UI, but it's there for you to manage. It's more about the management as well, like how to create your agent and start server, start locators. And we also are working on new management API, which is it's a RESTful API, so it's geared more towards application. So it's not human interactive, but it's meant to be used by the program to talk to the cluster. And so it's a RESTful API, and the result is all JSON based. So you can use that. And we also have a Java API that interacts with this RESTful API, so you can use directly. And there's also another Go client that's going to be open sourced soon. So you can use that to interact with the RESTful API as well. And one benefit of this management RESTful API is it's definitely more interactive. It's definitely more geared towards programmatic interaction. And also, it simplifies the configuration process. Like before, in order to configure your cluster, you either need to work with XML or work with GFish. But for this one, the configuration is meant to be a lot easier for you to manage.
Thanks, Jinmei. I think that was really great to hear about some of the new configuration management work that's coming up. But I'd like to stick on this question for a little bit, because what we're really talking about here is like insight into the cluster, how it's performing, how much memory it's consuming. Jake, when you were working with performance, what tools did you use to look into the cluster?
Well, right now looking at the cluster is somewhat difficult because we have this stat system, right? That produces these VSD files or these stats files that are difficult to look at. The tool is an X11 based tool. It's complicated. But one of the cool new things that we have coming up that's available now in the latest release actually is starting to integrate with Micrometer, which allows you to plug into really any backend that you want to monitor your application.
I just saw a thumbs up there. Pretty good stuff.
Well, I'm glad you can see anything. Yeah, so with the Micrometer coming into play, it's going to make things a lot easier for monitoring your performance, setting up alerting, whatever you need to do around that, and really, put the power in your hands to integrate it with whatever you have in your system.
And if I'm not mistaken, if you hang out for a couple more talks, there's going to be one specifically on Micrometer and what's being exposed and how it works. So Awesome. All right, let's go on to another question now. Who's next? Raise your hand super high. Let's see who's got it. So while you're thinking about that question, I have some secret questions that the panelists don't know about. Okay, so first of all, let's start with rolling back the curtains. Geode is an open source project. How do I contribute to it? Where do I start? Naba, you talked about being the newest on the team. How did you start?
Yeah, so first of all, like you would want to know how Geode works, and the best place to do it is a Geode documentation or the Java docs. And like first give out small contributions in which you can improve the documentation, then slowly move into the issues. So we have markers which says Geode starter or a newbie issues, which you can easily pick up and start contributing to the project. I think that would be a very good step to get into the project.
You can also go onto the user list and the dev list and get wow, it's loud now. You can also subscribe to those as well.
And also contribute examples as well. If you have a very cool usage of it, and we also have example repository, if you can contribute that as well, that would be great too.
And if you're really interested in performance, Helena's side has a link on there to target it directly for performance, and there's some really interesting stuff in there. There's some simple things, and there's some really complicated issues to solve.
Cool. So I go in, I find that Geode ticket that has kind of a thing that I'm interested in, and I write some code, and I submit a pull request. What happens then? How do I get that merged? How do I know that it's a good pull request?
We group, us committers, we constantly keep monitoring what pull requests are lingering or there. And like if a particular person is not an experienced or has no knowledge of the PR, so we send a request to the particular committer who will definitely have information about that part of the code and try to get it merged in.
It does go through a round of code reviews, and you have to pretty much answer any questions that anyone has on that on that code review, and then at that point, the committer would probably merge.
And rest assured, and we look at every PR very closely, and we don't let one PR sitting there for a long time. So if you would like to contribute, and definitely PR would be the best route to go.
Cool. Just a quick check. Does anyone have a Geode PR open right now? Oh, I see some over there. Excellent.
Cheating.
All right. So one more question, though. Don't we need to run some tests before we commit our code?
Yeah.
Like, how does that work?
And part of that PR process is actually an automated system through our CI that runs it through all the same testing we run on our main line. So you'll get feedback right away. Well,
And also
about a few hours.
Also, we follow the TDD approach of it. So we ensure that whatever code is being committed, there is a adjoining test attached to it to ensure that we have code coverage for the new incoming code.
Cool. All right, thank you. Let's go back to the audience for another question. Do I see a hand out there? Another question. We have one here up front.
A quick one. But so we are on Jumpfire, not on Geode, and I'm very interested in 110, obviously, because my commenter and all the good stuff. But the current version of Jumpfire 9.8.4, I believe, does not have Geode 110. Do you know when that might be in Jumpfire?
Anyone want to take that one? All right, I'll do it. So there's a bigger question here, though. It's like, how are commercial distributions of Geode shipped and managed? And so I think all of us up here have a certain brand on our t-shirts, but as Geode committers, we're also independent of that vendor. So we have different hats, and so most of our answers up here will be with the Geode hat on. When I take it off and put on a vendor hat, I'll let you know. So my vendor hat's on now, and what I'll say is that for the case of GemFire, which is a commercial distribution built on GemFire.
Not Geode.
I did it wrong. Okay, let's start over. GemFire is a commercial distribution built on Geode. And typically, the GemFire team likes to do coordinated releases soon after the Geode release ships. Just makes things simpler. But the GemFire team also has a set of tests that are not open source, and there's an additional degree of testing that goes on and verification that happens beyond what's done in the open source community. So I guess what I can say is it's coming, but it's not out yet. Cool. All right, spark any further questions in the audience. If you do have a question, there's one up front.
I'm curious how you balance the Apache's gravity on using Apache resources versus the Spring community of wanting to use, Spring resources and technologies in the Geode. Is there discussions around that, or is it two separate things depending on when you hit GemFire versus?
Okay, so let me try and capture that question. The question was, since we're an Apache project, are we asked to use Apache technologies? We're also closely related to a Spring project. Are we asked to use Spring technologies? How does that work? How do we make our technology choices in Geode? Fair enough? Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Jason, you want to answer that?
I'll try. I think that's the cool thing about being an open source project. I think you, depending on what you're interested in, you put the proposal out on the dev list and build consensus on what technologies you want to use. And at that point, a decision is made and the work is done there. I think in the past we've used Apache resources or we've changed the resources that we've used, not from Apache, but also Pivotal sponsored resources as well. So it just depends on consensus on the dev list, really.
Any further thoughts there?
I think working with Spring is easy, both of them being Apache projects, so we can openly talk about what Spring wants from us and what we need from Spring. So working with Spring has been easier with us. We have been designing new APIs so that Spring Boot is easily able to start up Geode and everything.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I don't see pressure in the Apache community to only use Apache technologies. Certainly with any open source project, there's licensing considerations where you want to be compatible, and there's restrictions on Apache projects about using LGPL or other projects of that nature. But it's really up to the individual PMC how they choose to run the project, what proposals they choose to move forward, and what technologies they want to invest in. And I think as we're going to find out more throughout the week, Spring is one of those superpowers, and we're very fortunate that there's a strong Spring community associated with the Geode project to make it a natural fit for Spring Boot applications and just a seamless annotation-based approach to development of cache-based applications. So thanks for that question. I see a hand raised in the far side of the room.
2 years ago, Pivotal announced that GemFire will be integrated with PCF, and they branded Pivotal Cloud Cache. So how are you involved with the integration with PCF? Or the community works on that, or is it a separate team on Pivotal?
Okay, I didn't hear all of your question, but I think the gist of it is so there's a commercial distribution of Geode called Cloud Cache that works as a managed data service on the Cloud Foundry platform. And is it the same team that works on Geode and Cloud Cache, or are they different?
Or the community is involved in that, or is a separate initiative?
Yeah. So, and the follow-up is the community involved in this, or is it completely separate? So let's talk about it from a code perspective, because I think that's where all of these organizational things are clarified. Anyone want to tackle that?
I'll jump on that one. So just like, you know, GemFire is a commercial distribution of Geode, so is PCC or Cloud Cache. The influence then on that community is really no different with what gets done as far as Geode is concerned. We have just as much, you know, influence into that community as anybody else, any other company or entity that wants to contribute to the Geode project.
Yeah, it all comes down like what features do we choose to implement first? And if we see a need for this feature in the community or in any of the product, then we would probably want to put that on our priority list. Like that, the RESTful-based management API. That's also one of the features that get requested most, either from the community and from the product, from a distributed product. So that's why we put that on our list.
I'd say like every line of code that goes into Apache Geode, it will be a community effort. So if PCC needs something that needs to be integrated into Apache Geode, they have to go through the entire process of going to the dev list where the community would vote, see that if it's a valid concern or not, and then the community will get it into Geode.
Cool. So there's a clear line, but I think all of us in some ways tend to confuse names sometimes since we're working on both of these product at the same time.
It's a lot of constant hat switching, and especially when you're dealing with the dev list and trying to, you know, make a case for the need that you have from the business, but also look at it from the Geode side and say, what does the community really need that? And where does this all lie? And it's a fun challenge.
Excellent. Okay, I hope we addressed that topic, but I'm happy to move on to another question if you have one. Otherwise, we're going to pull out another one from the secret stash. So while you're thinking, what I'm wondering about is how much data can Geode hold?
How much you got?
I have terabytes.
That's not how many servers you have, right?
Yeah. Depends on how much memory you have, how much you want to persist to disk, how much you want to overflow. You know, it's so configurable to handle all sorts of workloads and any size of data, really.
So what are the constraints then?
Hardware, your network, your usage, your use case. Those are all constraints.
Like constraints for Geode, like what it can and cannot handle, or like?
Yeah, let's say I've got 1 billion rows of data. Is that going to work?
Sure.
Sure.
You sound really confident.
Yes.
We know that it can. I think, you know, you just have to design, you know, your regions appropriately, your infrastructure appropriately, you know, making sure that you've sized appropriately for whatever workload's going to be happening on there. You know, don't just think about, okay, I have 10 terabytes of data. I'm going to allocate 10 terabytes of memory on all these servers, and I'm good to go. Well, what about the actual application itself? What is that going to consume? You know, what's the work overhead? What's the function overhead? Queries, all that stuff, and leaving space for that. So there's a lot of things to think about when developing an application for it that can really you know, impact the ability to store that much data or to perform at load.
I think I overheard one of the big users of Geode is a China Railway Company, and they have thousands of nodes up. So we definitely can handle a large amount of data.
Cool. Thanks, panelists. All right, I see a hand over here. I think you need to try turning on the mic. Oh. Okay, just give us a shout and we will repeat the question.
You can take it. My question is, if we size our servers with, let's say we start the servers with certain gig heap, how much data should each
server we should load with? Is there a percentage, like if let's say if my server is 16 gig heap, should I load all the way to 16 gig or 80% of 16 gig? I'm not talking about the system RAM, but the heap on the server. Is there a formula? Is there some calculation there, some math there?
Okay, so let's talk about this subject because it's all of a sudden got super practical. We want to know how much heap should a server have?
And again, I think that comes down to really your use case and really understanding what you're going to do with that data. You know, if the server is going to be doing nothing but gets and puts, you can probably use a large portion of that heap to store data. I don't want to throw out a number and you go and run with that and have a problem, but you can use more of your memory to store the data. But if you're going to run functions and queries and other things that actually have to work on the server itself, you need to consider that workload needs to use memory. And we know how Java operates too, that we're going to allocate memory and we're going to deallocate it as it collects. And we have to plan for that and have space for that. So really the best way to do that would be to build this application into your test environment and benchmark it. Figure out, does it meet your needs? Does it meet your SLAs that you have for your customers at this configuration? And if not, then figuring out what you need to scale. Whether that's, I need more memory, I need more servers, I need more CPU, I need a faster network, and understand where you're at there. And hopefully the benchmark tools that we're starting to build will give you that ability too, because you'll be able to just run this known quantity workload, and how does that perform, and how does it change when I add and remove resources?
So I think another dimension on this question is, I know people are running Geode servers with 16 gigabytes of heap on a server and hundreds of gigabytes of heap on a server. Like, why might I choose one versus the other?
I think it all depends on your performance requirements. And no matter what kind of heap or memory you're using, Geode can handle that because we have expiration rules, we have eviction rules that would make your data consistent as well. So it all depends on what kind of requirement, what kind of performance you want.
So I'm sorry, I may be wrong, but Jason can correct me. So if we're executing a query and it needs a huge result set, and we are populating that set over and over, so if we run out of space, there will be a limitation on the amount of queries that we can run in a server. Is that right?
Sure.
So I guess you have to run some dev environment to figure out, okay, these are the number of queries that I need to execute on my system. So I need to leave that space in the system so that it can execute this query without giving out a low memory exception.
Yes, that's where I was heading to, but I don't know how I framed my question. But my whole point was that if we have a certain heap on the server, do we load up to 50% of the heap with the data, so we leave the other 50% or whatever that percentage is for the internal operations for the Geode and GemFire to work? Because we always run into sizing problem in our environment. Like we build our clusters with certain size and certain heap, and then our data grows. The volume grows over the time, and then we start with 50% of the heap usage of what the total allocated is, and then over time it grows, and then it's still there, 20% free is there, but we still run into memory issues. So maybe the GemFire underneath it's working some operations or something it's doing. So we just want to know what's the recommendation on that.
And again, I don't think there's a hard number. I would pick that number that you seemed to find out at the beginning, and you said, okay, 50% seemed reasonable for you and had the performance profile that you wanted. Then I would maintain that. So as your data grows, you need to grow your cluster to keep yourself at that 50%. Just like you never want to run, if I'm doing a high volume website, I never want to run it, constantly at 80% of my capacity, because how am I going to handle my burst, right? Well, how am I going to handle change? So we want to pick where you want to have your application run, that SLA, pick your bounds, and scale up and scale down as needed. And Geode, scales up and down pretty easily. You saw that talk with Dan about, rebalancing and all that. That comes into play with doing that scaling up and scaling down. You can add a server, take a server out, and the data will shuffle itself around to rebalance.
I think another factor to consider is the amount of headroom you want to leave the garbage collection engine. And most of our users today are running CMS, and in conjunction with eviction and critical eviction thresholds, those can keep your memory management constant in terms of heap usage. We're also doing some explorations around newer GC engines that are coming up in more recent JVMs, and I'm really curious to see how those perform compared to the CMS that most of our users are working with today.
Yeah, and you can actually play around with that yourself. The performance slides that Helena had talked about, we have actually the ability to change which garbage collector the benchmark is going to use when it's running, and yeah, there's some really interesting things coming out of the new Z and Shenandoah collectors, both which are very constant, low latency collectors, and in areas where we see CMS or even G1, spike up in its latency and collection times on large amounts of memory and large things it's collecting. The Shenandoah and Z are still within that sub 10 millisecond collection times. It's really, really cool. And I think it'll have a big effect on Geode in the future.
It's just to continue with what you were saying earlier, I think based on your use case, there are a lot of things going on with Geode itself, how many indexes you have, what type of queries you run, all that kind of munches the numbers a little bit, and that's why you can't really guess on a random value, right?
How many background work you have, how many functions you want to run, so those things.
I can say so too that some of the changes that we've made, especially in 1.9 and 1.10 both have some really good performance improvements in them that not only just give you faster response times and more throughput, they also reduce the resources that we consume. The connection pool also, that was a huge change just in the matter of resources. The number of sockets that need to be consumed in order to handle that many operations dropped drastically. The CPU load dropped drastically. If you set it at a consistent rate of throughput, your CPU, you use less CPU to do that. And less memory, there's less garbage being produced through that new implementation and through some other optimizations that we made using those benchmarks. So every little bit that we're able to gain in performance, either through reducing locks and garbage production, is going to return itself on the application now, because that's room for you to do work, room for your CPU time, room for your memory load, and we're trying to reduce more of that.
So what I'm hearing is a simple question took 20 minutes to talk about. Is that right?
It's not a simple question.
There's no silver bullet. There's no magic number.
You have to test it yourself, is what I'm
Right.
hearing. On your own workload.
Yes.
And it's inevitable, right? Like if your data keeps growing, at one point you have to scale vertically or horizontally.
Makes sense. Thank you. Okay, I see a pointer to a question out here.
Yes. So I'll go back to the previous question. We were talking about the capacity, how much is too much? And I think I will take some input from the answer provided in this question as well. Like, as when we were going through some demos, there are like, replications, locks, and kind of recovery, auto recovery, and distribution of the data, right? And now we're talking about query functions and all that. How complex is your query? How much your data grid and all that? Being said, putting everything together, again, I'll go back to the same question, like, as we talk, like how much is too much? And what I heard last time was unlimited. Because you guys say, yeah, terabytes. How many terabytes? I mean, if I 100 terabytes, should I do that? Answer is obviously, everybody said no, you should not, right? I don't want to put 100 terabytes of data into my cache. Then what's the magic? What's the realistic, ideal range? I won't say, just give me the line, but what's the ideal, like percentage-wise or record-wise? Like where should we say, yeah, you know what? I think that's it. If you go more than that, other factor will start kicking in.
Yeah.
And you lose one node, replicating one node going to take 2 hours because you got 100 terabytes. So what's that number? How do I recommend my development team? Say, hey, you know what? Chaos is there to leverage, but it's not a database, and that should be your limit pretty much. You should not be just everybody want a high performance system, but how much they should kind of be towards that line.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Again, it's really what's the design center of Geode? If I were building an application, and where's the sweet spot? Is that something that we can really talk about? Or is I don't know if Brian is still in the room, but Brian Dunlap, had a great way of sharing well, Geode is a cache, and it's this, and it's this, and it's this, and this. And so sometimes it's hard to talk about exactly what your application is because it depends on which of those and things you're using. But given those challenges, do you see a design a sweet spot for a deployment or an application?
For me, again, it will always be what you are using Gemfire for. Assume you have a Gemfire system in which you are just going to do gets and puts. So you can fill it up to the brim, right? And if you want to use it for some complex queries which are going to result in a answer or result set which is in size of gig. So you'll want more space to be empty in your server where you can do the computation. So again, it's tough to give a hard set number. It's you have to know your use case and see, okay, this is what it's gonna be, and I need to leave this much space for it.
I kind of understood the question to be more of what's an upper limit too. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
I don't really have a good answer for that one.
All right, we have some puzzles to go figure out, it seems like.
I mean,
what's the upper limit?
Yeah, it comes down to a lot of tuning as well. I mean, if you watch Dan's presentation about how partitioning works and things go into buckets, well, if you run with the default bucket size of 113, I think it is, if you're putting in terabytes of data, well, you're going to have very large buckets. Well, that's a lot of data to move when there's a failure, right? So you probably want to size up your buckets. So what's the maximum number of buckets you can have? Depends on the number of servers you have and other things. Yeah, I don't really have a hard number. We have to go play with that.
As far as I see, I think Geode, if I see Geode as a bucket, you can fill the water up to the brim, or you can just use 50% of the capacity. It all depends on each individual product's requirement. Maybe your PM would say, okay, I don't want to saturate the server all the time, because I want to handle the burst traffic or anything. So, it's up to each individual's project's requirement. It's not the Geode limitation.
Okay, I see a question over here.
Hi. In a previous talk, we heard that the C++ client at some point was supposed to be also a server. And I was curious about that. Was that some side project to have a more performant server? Was it to be living together with the Java server? Was it before the Java server was completed? Just curious about that.
So the fun thing about working on a project with a lot of history is that there are great stories way back in the archives. So long before there was Geode, there was a Gemfire product team. And so I believe one of the stories is that there was a customer who was interested in a C++ grid type architecture, and it needed to be in C++. So there was an effort to do that. It eventually ended up in a native client. And I'm not sure I have a lot of the apocryphal, more detailed nature of that. In fact, probably none of us here do.
No, that happened.
But it was a long time ago. Interesting side note. But we do have an answer here up front, so talk to Mike later if you want more details.
But some of that code does still exist in there. So if you do go play around with C++ code, and Blake and Charlie were saying, like, if you see something that seems a little bit out of place, that might be why it's there. Someday it might go away. It's more about just focusing on adding features and functionality and getting it into a really great client versus trying to pull out a lot of old stuff that doesn't need to be there anymore.
All right, so we are getting short on time, and no panel can end without a lightning round. Am I right? So, actually, let's do one more question. Hold the lightning round. We're almost there. So, give us our last question.
So we've had some regions in our test cluster that were very, very large, like very large, and tens of gigabytes at least. And we saw that during testing and just being stupid, we would run select star and maybe select star sort by queries against that, and quickly realized that that was a very bad idea, and we don't get the return because the return first has to sort it and then has to return 10 gigabytes of data, right? But even closing down our clients will not close down that long-running query. Is there a plan to expose queries running in the cluster or give us the ability to kill them? Or have I just missed a setting somewhere where I can set the query max time to load?
Jason, you want to talk about that? Because I'd love to talk about what kinds of queries and operations Geode is best at, but I think we can give you a much more concrete answer directly. Jason, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, so there is a flag. I can't remember what the actual flag is off the top of my head, but there's a flag that you can set to cancel timeouts, assuming you have the resource manager running. And you can set a timeout, and it will kill the query after it's been running on the server for that amount of time. As far as being able to see queries in flight and being able to kill those, I think we can probably propose something on the dev list and try to build that feature in. It's currently not on my list of things to do, but we probably could, whoever wants to work on it probably could get that in there.
That's something for observability.
Right, good question. So long-running queries, mass select star, something you may not want to do. However, let's go on to our lightning round. So panelists, tell me one thing you wish everyone knew about Geode. 30 seconds, go. What is one thing you wish everybody knew about Geode? So you're up first.
Wow, I'm like on the spot. Everybody knew about Geode. I think I would go back to actually Brian's presentation and just know that Geode, while it can do all these things, you need to ask yourself, should I be doing all these things? Should I be taking my old workloads and putting them on here in that same sort of way, or should I rethink them? And if you rethink them the way a distributed cache is designed, you're going to get a much better application out of that than if you just try to take your workload straight to it as is. Even though you can do it.
Love it. Thank you. Jinmei.
And Geode is so feature-rich, and so don't ever think that you need to know every part of it in order to contribute. Like there are different levels that you don't hesitate to contribute, and we love contributors.
Thank you, Jason.
Very similar. I wish everyone would know all the features that Geode actually provides and figure out cool ways to use them, because just hearing these, I feel like there's a lot that we also don't know. So it's very interesting to see how people use it. So the more you guys know, the more cool use cases we hear about. So.
Right. Nava, if you can answer this, and then I've got one more for you.
One more, okay. So I'll be selfish, and I would like people to know about one of the features that I was part of in developing, that would be the Lucene text search. So we have a very strong text-based search based on Lucene, and we have the index and the data on the memory, so it gives a way faster performance than data residing on disk.
Cool. Jason. Well, I said Nava. So Nava, if you could change one thing about Geode, what would it be?
Again, the Pulse browser, I would like it to be at more par with pgadmin kind of a stuff.
Cool. Jason, what would you change?
Improve debug tools.
Debug. What would you change, Jinmei?
Get rid of cache XML. That's the very, very old way to configure your cluster.
All right, cache XML. And Jake?
I want to get rid of the global cache. I want us to be able to have multiple caches in an application.
No more globals.
No more globals.
That'll be easy.
Yeah. Well, hey, we did it in the C++ client.
All right. Everyone, thank you so much. This is your Geode panel.